G'day guys, today I am producing a battle report from a game I played a couple days ago. Um, this is Aurora 2 versus Garryth 2. I'm just showing you my lists now. You can see a Corollary, some Tesselators, a Toro. I've got two Frustrum Locuses, Void Archons, Negation Angels. Gaspia has two Scavengers. Um, I think probably the only interesting parts of this list that you haven't seen before are the two scavengers on Gaspy. The reason I'm taking two of them is just that I found that they perform really well as little sources of DPS on feat turn, and they're really cheap, good weapon master options in this faction, and they have flight obviously, so they benefit from Aurora's kit. Over on the Garryth side of things, we've got three Harpies, Moros, triple Arcanist mechanic. I know it says there's a Fane Knight Guardian there, but he actually trades that out just as the game starts for another Arcanist mechanic and a Solus. Um, Iris, Hermit, Narn, two Void Archons, double Mage Hunter Strike Force with Solus Escort and Command Attachment. I'm not really sure what my opponent's going for here. Like, I think it probably deals with my kind of infantry okay, and it probably deals with like Doom Reavers pretty well. I can't see it dealing with Shield Walled, Arcane Shielded Legion of Lost Souls at any point. The two Void Archons are obviously a nice touch in his list. The triple Harpies a pretty solid fire base to start off from, and Nan's an interesting choice. I don't think he's a great choice, but like, what the hell can you really take in that theme? I probably would have dropped one of the Arcanist mechanics and the two Solus Escorts and the Solus Void Tracer, obviously, and picked up something a little more damagey. Maybe even Nan and gone like the two Chain Strike Weapon Master dudes that you get in Retribution, the Mage Hunter Assassins. But it looks like a fine list. I think it's probably an okay matchup for me. Looking at this retrospectively, if I go first, I think it's a stomp. If he goes first and he plays it well, I think he can do a lot of damage to me. But I don't think that our pilot here was able to kind of get that kind of damage out on the field. We got three forests in the middle, very small ones. We got a large forest off to the side, a rock wall, some cover, two clouds, a water feature, a trench, and then a building. I played on this map quite a few times. It's quite good, especially with spread your legs, this particular scenario. You just see my opponent picking up his two solos, as I said, in the deployment steps. You can kind of see that my opponent's going to be forced to play his rectangular zone in his circle, and he won't have too much to deploy into my rectangle, so I'm going to try and capitalize on that if I can. You see him start to deploy. Pretty standard deployment. Gareth's pretty loose in his deployment, so I don't think this is super complicated. Just get all your jacks in control range and kind of suit them to what you need them to do. You see him separate some of his solos and get everything in. Most of his models are actually AD, I'm finding, so that means that I'm not actually going to know where a whole lot of his stuff's going to go before the game starts. You just see me. Something I like to do, especially in War Table to save time, is just to, while my opponent's deploying, prepare my AD models and my units just so that they're able to be deployed quickly. He's finishing up his deployment here with his Void Archons and his lights. I think he mulls around in this decision, and I feel like this is a time where you could lose a lot of time, so I think it's important to not do that kind of thing. I start to deploy. See me go for a very central plan with my Void Archons. Toro comes in. Can't really decide which side I want him on. The Toro's probably not going to be super valuable in this game because of all the Def 14. I go to deploy Aurora. I keep fiddling with where I want her because I think I want her behind this wall for most of the game. One thing I do like to do is always have the Frustrum Locuses within 10 when she starts because she inevitably casts at least an upkeep. And you see this little maneuver I do here with the corollary and the tessellator. This is because one thing I keep fucking up is the initial deployment of the tessellators and the corollary. It's very important that you get an efficient activation out of that corollary, and that's what I'm trying to achieve here with this deployment, because you want it to get the maximum focus it can by turn 2 so that it can have 3 to hand out to the tessellators so they're free activations. Alright, so that's my deployment. You can kind of see Gaspy kind of just goes wherever. He kind of fits into the map later on in the turn. I think it's good to keep the Frustrum Locuses within 10 inches of Aurora so that she can cast Arcane Propulsion and give them focus to start handing out Mage Statics on turn 1. Sometimes I even cast Hand of Destruction so that I can get even more power points onto them. Sometimes I'll even just target something that I definitely can't hit with the express point of giving them more focus points so that they can cast more Mage Statics per turn. And the test letters usually just deploy wherever the corollary goes, and the corollary is obviously going to go and play with Aurora. Obviously, on top of that, Aurora is within 6 inches of the Toro so that she can cast arcane propulsion on it. My opponent deploys his Mage Hunter Strike Force. I don't think anyone's particularly surprised about their kind of deployment. It's first turn, so there's no point in doing anything fancy with them. One thing I didn't like from my opponent was that he put his Iris and Narn out to the side. I feel like they're much better going right up the middle because they kind of, even if Iris goes for a Disruptor Bolt, and if she hits, the game's over for me. I just lose. So I think having her in the middle so that I can't take this kind of rock wall thing here would have been a much better decision than what she did end up doing, which is going out to the side, on the side where I'm probably going to just accept that I'm going to lose. And she's not really influencing Aurora at all from where she starts. So I'm not super happy with this decision. I think they would have been better right up the middle, especially since he's going first and he can kind of counter deploy my AD. You see me just deploy my negators. I'm not afraid of him shooting me. He's not in range, so I just kind of give them the furthest forward deployment I can. Not really phased that I'm going to lose any of them. The first thing to note here is that this screen that I'm using is not the screen that I'm playing on, so you will not see my individual mouse movements and you won't see obviously the units light up with the measurements to other models because I'm not controlling from this screen. You see this Morris kind of figuring out where he can go. My opponent I think gave him one focus so that he could go off on his little run here. But obviously he's a little bit afraid of these three negation angels out here, this purple unit kind of just charging him and destroying him. So you see him play quite passively because of that. You can see he's taken up a position where Garryth should be pretty safe against shooting. Most of his solos are just going to kind of fall in behind. You don't really see too much aggression from this player in this position because obviously those negation angels are just outside of threat of his stuff, so he can't really start by alphaing. So he has to just not give me anything so that I can't destroy him on the first turn. You start to see my opponent think about where to put Nan and this Mage Hunter over here. Obviously, they're really out of position out on this far right side, meaning that they're not really going to influence where Aurora's going to end up, which most players should figure is going to be behind that wall. And I think that's really going to be to my opponent's detriment. It's going to mean that he doesn't have the kind of pressure that he really needs to push me back and stop me from getting a really decent turn two. And you see even here, like this player is not so cagey about taking casualties here that he's just going to let me take up most of the board with my negation angels. Safe, I guess, in the knowledge that his crossbow is threatened so far that it shouldn't matter. As we'll see that doesn't have too much of an impact on how I play. So we see these two units. They both they're only moving 3 inches. Like that's not what you want to be doing first turn. You want to be taking up as much real estate as you possibly can, and he's really not. He's kind of only just leaving his kill box here with these models, and I think that's really something that bites him in the back on turn 2 when he's not really able to alpha me because he hasn't offered me anything on turn 1. I think sometimes it's important for new players to remember that it's not the end of the world if you lose a few models turn 1. You can play as cagey as you want, but at the end of the day, if your models aren't in range, it doesn't matter how many models are left because none of them are relevant. It's better to lose, say, 3, 4 Mage Hunters here and accept, yeah, I'm going to lose them, but then I'm going to hit back hard and I'm going to kill like 6, 7 Negation Angels. Sometimes it's just important to hedge your bets and say, yeah, I'm going to lose pieces, and my opponent's also going to lose pieces, and because they're going to lose pieces too, that's okay. Sometimes still you enter a position where your opponent has responded to you playing more aggressively by playing even more cagey than you would have expected. And that's great too. Because what happens then is you get to take up more real estate, and it's fine for you because that's more scenario presence that you have, that's more models in the way, that's even more aggression that you can project. It's always good to play aggressive in War Machine. It's not nearly as good to play passive. And I think that's something that this player definitely fell into here. Running 3 inches with most of your army is just not where you want to be on turn 1. And I think it really goes to show how, like, even though Aurora really wants to go first, sometimes she can just scare her opponent into playing so passively that it's as if she got to go first. And that's definitely what happens here. In which case, like, going second with Aurora into such a passive player is as good as going first, better even, because you end up being the first to score as well, which you'll see comes in massively handy over here for me. You see Garryth start to activate. He's playing relatively aggressively. You can't shoot anything turn 1, understandably, so he's just gonna kind of move to position. Casting Occultation on the Hermit, I don't really understand. Like, I'm not gonna take shots at the Hermit, and you kind of want the Hermit to get shot at because he's such a terrible target to shoot. So I don't really understand a lot of the decisions that have been made so far. I think people overvalue that Hermit, thinking that it's way too important, when realistically it's not that useful a lot of the time. Like, the ignoring a damage roll is nice and the debuff is good, but like, I feel like you need to be getting use out of 2 pieces out of 3 of its kit for it to really be important. You see my opponent just kind of mulling around here, not really sure where he wants to put his lights, not really sure how to position the Void Archons as it is. He's kind of definitely log jammed himself here. See me there doing a cheeky check on a that was a Spirit Door running Tesla play to see if I could go for a cheeky assassination on Garryth, but I don't think it would be feasible. I'd have no follow-up after he went. Totally possible against the right caster, not this caster though. Yep, so you see his Harpies are just filling in behind the rest of the army because the rest of the army really hasn't moved that far. So you see his army kind of get log jammed on this kind of 15 to 16 inch line, and I think that really hurt my opponent here. Here you see my turn begin. I start with my apparitions. I know you're meant to do your allocation first, but I decided to just see where my models will go and I'll allocate afterwards. I think the only allocation I do here is to test leader number 1. This is just so that eventually I can give the corollary the focus it needs after they run. You generally want the corollary starting on 2 focus at the start of turn 2 so that it can get to that 3 and hand out the full boats to the test leaders to keep them fully efficient. This is really important because I find Aurora tends to run really hot turn 2, and being able to support her in that by having the corollary do the focus for her test leaders is huge. It doesn't matter quite so much in this game because there's nothing for her to cast Hand of Destruction on, but it really matters in some matchups where like she's basically Hand of Destructioning something so that they can go and deal with it on their own. You see me move the corollary into a position where she's going to be relevant. Normally I go for Repo 5 on her, but today I'm going for Flying High. Reason being, obviously, my opponent's list is mostly shooting. Almost every model has some kind of shooting, so the less shooting he's going to get, the better for me. The less models he can target with his shooting, the better. It actually means he ends up missing a CRA because he didn't have enough models in range. My opponent over here checking a range, being a bit cheeky. Not something I'm super afraid of, especially when he's only got like range 5. I'm not really afraid of Aurora getting paralyzed here, I'm more afraid of her just getting shot to death by Garryth himself. I hand out a bunch of mage statics, just so that Garryth has a harder time casting mortalities. Obviously he can still witchmark them, but sometimes you want to shoot something, kill it, and then witchmark something else. In which case it's not very valuable it's kind of valuable then to have mortality. I kind of wished I could have put it on my caster, but it's not a huge deal. You see me just kind of making the best use of the terrain here, trying to figure out where I can go so that I can give my opponent the least models to shoot at. Put down 2 clouds with Gaspy, obviously that's most of his role. I find in this list he tends to play more of a supporty kind of cloud wall up, protect the caster kind of game than the beat stick that you see in other lists. Just because he's really, really good at it in this list, because everything's a construct for him to give a threat range buff to. Try to nestle that Void Archon into that little cloud wall crevice there. I like getting my models into positions where they're going to be very safe, but really far forward. And that's really what that position achieves. Running my Negation Angels forward there is really valuable. They get Prowl, so he's got to come forward to kill them anyway. I'm going to lose a few of them. I don't really give a shit about that. But the more models he has to bring forward in order to kill me, the more models I can then kill in return, which is a big deal for me. You see me go with these test leaders behind the wall because they're probably the best pieces for putting there at the moment. Getting the cover on them is really valuable because they're kind of his best targets, but they're also not valuable targets. Movement widget here. Generally speaking, my goal is to have her within 9 of any of my heavies so that all my heavies can be repaired by her. In this case, she actually just runs for the flag. Being speed 9 means that she's actually really good at getting there. I'm just going for some more prowl here, getting my models into good spots so that they get nice cover. I know that I can apparate forward, so I'm not super worried about losing them. You see me here put my scavenger out here. I know he's going to kill the scavenger. I'm not super worried about it, but it's just about getting him to commit some of his troops. Especially without Repo 3, a lot of those troops are kind of very vulnerable to what I can do. Here we see my opponent start his turn. He's looking at getting Moros into those 3 Negation Angels, which is just not a trade you really want to be making, to be honest. I don't think it's a good trade. I don't think it's the right change ever. You also see him going for this mortality on the scavenger. And I know for a fact that the scavenger is screwed. He's absolutely going to get slaughtered by those Mage Hunter Strike Force. But he decides to go for the mortality anyway, wastes his focus resource, he might as well. I'm definitely certain that that model's gonna die. I just wish it had mattered for my opponent's sake. You see the Mage Hunter Strike Force move into position. Now remember, these guys don't have Repo 3, which means that they're kind of stuck there. Having to commit with a unit this light always kind of sucks, especially when they can't Repo afterwards to kind of give themselves a better position and they're just out in the wind to whatever wants to take them on. It's a real problem for my opponent, I think, later in the game. But for now, they're just moving up. They're going to take shots as they can. They just kill the scavenger, which is an atrocious trade for that many points. Got to remember, Mage Hunter Strike Force is still a 20-point unit, so that really hurts as a trade. You see the scavenger start to get shot at. Oh, he does not roll well, but that scavenger is going to go down pretty quick. You see it start to take some big hits. And yeah, and within 2 successful CRAs, he's getting shredded. So he kills my scavenger, no big surprise there, but that whole unit is like perfectly aligned for a Void Archon spray, so I'm not upset. And you see the second unit of Mage Hunter Strike Force go. I think he actually took a cheeky little bit of extra movement there, not that that really matters. And they're just going to kill a few Negation Angels. It's not necessarily a bad play if they had Repo, but they don't have Repo, which means that this is awful. Because it means that they're kind of left in the wind when it comes to the response. They don't have any support. His caster doesn't really do anything to support them. I mean, he's feeded, which means that they'll get a little bit of a return shot. Maybe he can Thunderbolt something effectively, but I wouldn't count on that as a way to protect these models. So they come forward, they take their shots, and a lot of these shots hit. They kill whatever they target, but for what, really? Like, they kill 2 Negation Angels, I think, for the trade of basically the whole unit. And you're starting to see now why I consider Mage Hunter Strike Force not a particularly excellent option. They're a really decent ranged unit, but in an anti-ranged list like mine, it really doesn't help to have them on the field. I think basically all this unit ends up doing is killing 2 Mage Hunter Strike Force and giving my Void Archon Righteous Vengeance and a Soul, which is like a terrible use of a unit, terrible use of a fifth of your army. It does give him a Rotor proc, which means Moros can go over here, which means that Moros can come in here and kill 2 of these Negation Angels, leaving 1 alive. It's not a great trade. By no means is it really what I would consider a preferable way to play the game, but it's the way he played it, so he probably could have killed all 3 of them if he just rolled the 7s, but this play had been a pretty 7-averse beforehand, so I'm not surprised by any of the decisions he makes here. Again, you see him playing pretty cagey with his army. I mean, they've essentially only moved something like 6 inches off their deployment line. Those Mage Hunter Strike Force, and like the same for his Void Archons. They have barely left his deployment zone. He's playing so cagey against me, and I think this is a real problem, especially for some newer players, that they kind of end up in a position they're so used to getting kicked that they start to play super scared just to kind of avoid getting absolutely annihilated, and I think it creates a whole new problem for them. You see this player kill this one Annihilation Servitor, and it's got to be one of the worst plays I've ever seen here, because now it just gives my Void Archon and that Frustrum Locus a free move. Means that Void Archon's going to get up to all kinds of shenanigans, and that's really going to hurt my opponent here. I think that was a poorly thought out decision. I think it's going to cost him quite dearly during my turn. But see me starting my turn, this is probably going to be the core of the game. You see me kind of fiddling with where these 2 Void Archons can go, seeing where they can position so that they can get these nice sprays off. I think these sprays are probably the thing that win me the game, pretty much single-handedly, just with how many Mage Hunters they kill individually. I did get pretty lucky here on how well they rolled. I think though that the amount of models that my opponent allowed me to spray probably had a pretty big impact on how good these sprays went, because I just got to roll so many dice that a number of them were going to hit anyway. So you see me kind of measuring up my threat ranges here, seeing what I can spray to. Looking at those sprays, you're seeing I'm getting at least about 6 Mage Hunter Strike Force per spray, which is about where you want to be. When you're doing 8s to hit, that means you're probably going to kill at least 2, which is ideal. The Void Archon on the right only has 1 soul, but the one on the left, from perspective, has 3 souls, which means he's going to get quite a few boosts. Just finishing up some of maintenance phase effects here. Means he's going to get quite a few boosts. Here you see me kind of lining up an Aurora charge. I want to get her into that Mage Hunter Soulless Escort, because he doesn't have stealth, which means that AoE is going to hit all four of those guys and probably kill all of them. And then you just kind of see me fiddling with where I can go to after I do all this, because if Aurora is in that position, she's going to die. But also, if I just go Repo 5, I'm going to die. So what I'm looking at is it worth casting Flying High? Can I stay out of threat range? Going for a little cheeky slam play, seeing if I can slam, but I can't actually see this model, so I can't slam it. And that's me checking the line of sight there. You see me check out this little slam here. I don't actually have line of sight, so it's not possible, but that's probably a reasonable assassination vector on Garryth there. Especially when a model's activation probably isn't going to be super important to your game plan, like the Scavengers is. Next we do our apparition, standard order this time. No allocation to anything except the Tor. Obviously I've kept Arcane Propulsion. I made a little mistake with this apparition here for this little blue guy that's nestled between the Tesslator and the Scavenger. He really couldn't do anything. I think I ended up handing out 2 to the Scavenger, realizing Gaspy's not going to do anything as usual. The Void Archon is next to go, and I'm just kind of lining up the spray here. As you can see, the more Mage Hunters I can get, the better the spray is going to be for me. So that's what I'm aiming for here. I just want to get as many models in so that I have the highest chance of passing, and I think I roll nuts on this spray. I think I hit every model that I didn't boost on, and then I hit both of the models I boost on. And you see I just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Mage Hunters just gone, including the unit leader. And then I do a decent amount of damage to the Harpy as well. Then I port over here, kill these 2 solos. The reason being that I want to try and capture this flag later so I can try and score as many points as possible. This is kind of a stretch goal here. I needed to see if I succeeded over here before I made any more decisions, and this kind of cements my decision with Aurora because she's not going to be nearly as vulnerable without all of those Mage Hunters there. For a cheeky move the model and then put it back because I realized I needed to do something properly. So first thing I go for here is I'm looking at trying to charge this Negation Angel in. If his feat fails, I get a chance to hit him, and if I paralyze him, then my Teslators can just come in and destroy Garryth. Doesn't end up happening, not a big deal though. These Negation Angels weren't going to do a huge amount this game. You see me go for this shot here. This shot is probably part of the reason why I won. He left these in a perfect position for me to just kill 4 of them with my feated AoE. It leaves me on no focus, but I don't think it matters too much because I Spirit Door back to safety, and Gareth's not in range and none of his Harpies can get any meaningful damage on me, so I'm not super worried. Charge these 2 Negation Angels in. Between the 3 of them in the Frostrum, I think I end up killing Moros down to the box, and that means that the Negators can focus on taking out his lights instead of taking on Moros. Knocked out his movement here, which means that Moros is actually very vulnerable to taking hits here. Clearing that zone without using the Teslators was probably pretty big because it meant now my Teslators can go and deal with his lights instead of dealing with Morris in that zone. Lone Negation Angel comes along and does a bit of extra damage. Frustrum Locust comes along, casts Mage Static on Aurora, and then just finishes off the Morris with 2 damage. Speed 9 run just to get her onto the flag. The spray also goes amazingly. I think I kill 3, which is more than I needed to. But what that does is it lets me port over here and kill both of his 6-point solos, which I think probably helped to swing the game quite a bit because Iris probably could have gotten a shot on me, disruptor bolted me, made my next turn a lot harder. As of this moment, I'm scoring 4 zones, 4 points to my opponent's 1. And he really doesn't have the pieces on board in order to really take the game back to clear the middle zone even. Here's an important little thing for newer players is sometimes you got to get your models space so that they can get through to where they want to go. That's exactly what I did there with that ADO. Got it into a nice spot so that it could run through the gaps there to be in position to hand focus around. You see me start to unload with his Tesla. He doesn't do great for his hits here, but I'm in cover, so that's to be expected. I start taking some hits at him and I roll some atrocious damage rolls, but then I start to rack up some damage on this Harpy. My goal here is not necessarily to kill any of his models, it's just to kind of waste his shots and to get the most out of my damage that I can. I think I did fail to remember that Harpies have flight, which means that I think I'm taking full damage here rather than I should be taking 2 less damage for my feet, which I do apologize to my opponent for. It wasn't intentional, obviously. And it didn't. I don't think it ended up mattering here. All of the damage I'm getting here is just gravy on top of what I was going to do anyway. So I do a ton of damage to one of his Void Archons, absolutely destroy one of his Harpies, and leave another one pretty banged up, but not so banged up that it's going to matter too much. You see me take a big hit on this Tesslator who did take a hit already, which leaves him on 6 boxes, but then you go and see my grid, and the thing's basically fine. is basically fully functional despite taking more than half of his boxes as damage. But charge the scavenger in. The reason I'm charging the scavenger in is just to see if I succeed. If I succeed, probably eat the hermit's activation, and then I can go to town on this harpy over here, which is exactly what I do now that it's damaged. And I do really decent damage here. I knock out a lot of its systems, leave it pretty worse for wear. Gaspy just comes here to just kind of get in the way, be in the zone, so that if he tries to push on the zone, I can be aggressive against him. Toro comes here. He's not going to do a huge amount, but what he is going to do is just get in the way, be annoying for my opponent to deal with, and really stop my opponent from scoring that zone, which is exactly what he does. We see my opponent mostly just trying to pick up the pieces of what's left of his army after a really brutal turn 2. Gonna try and allocate some focus out here. I'm not actually sure I remember how much focus he ends up giving each harpy. That harpy on the left is completely shattered, so it can't be allocated any, even if he wanted to. He doesn't have a huge amount of pieces left at this point, so there's not a huge amount of options left for him. You see he's moved that lone mage under strike force into my zone to try and contest it, but it's just not going to be enough. He needs to stop me scoring 1 point while scoring at least 1 point himself, I think. And he doesn't have the board presence anymore to do it. I believe this is just Garryth going in for some swings, and for some reason this opponent insisted on boosting hits. Garryth most of the time should just be able to roll 7s and hope for the best in terms of hitting that scavenger there. He doesn't really have the damage to be throwing away boosts on rolls to hit, so you should really just be trying to roll raw attacks, because at the end of the day he's probably going to miss some, but Garryth is mat 8, so the benefit there is that he can definitely get more hits than he would by boosting, because the chance of missing is not really outweighed by the chance of hitting more attacks. You see these Mage Hunter Strike Force go in and they just do atrociously. All of them charged and they do no damage whatsoever. I think I lost 1 box overall, which is just pitiful for performance. I think my opponent's big mistake regarding these Mage Hunter Strike Force is that he just didn't apply any damage buffs. He probably needed to put either the Void Archon or Hermit in just to get them up to that power 11, power 13 mark. He was afraid of taking a counter charge here, which probably wasn't as big a deal as he was thinking, since it just gets the Toro to be in a worse position for me. He goes in with this harpy, kills the scavenger. I mean, that scavenger's gone, dead to rights. We all knew that, so nobody's surprised by that. But it kind of did its job, and we're all happy for that. This Void Archon's probably one of the only efficient activations my opponent really managed to get, mostly because of that ADO. He's able to kill the ADO, which means that he can then kill both Tesselators in return. You see my opponent just kind of milling over the decision. He wasn't initially going to do the spray first, which I just did not understand. I think my opponent really hasn't thought too hard about how to run this list, and I don't mean to be ragging on him, but I just feel like a lot of his weakness just comes down to not getting his activations to be efficient, basically. He ends up killing the ADO, which gives him a port. So he kills both Tesselators. Not a huge deal here. At this point, they've kind of served their purpose, they've done their damage, and now they're just taking a hit for me to make sure that Aurora doesn't get killed instead. Where that Void Archon is a pretty easy target for Gaspy to kill, meaning that Gaspy's going to have a good time cleaning the zone. Gaspy really has found a commanding position in the middle of the board there. Opponent remembers that he has Warpath, so he takes it and moves down to the end of the zone. And I think he takes his second Warpath, which at this point, I'm not going to be a dick about it. Just to kind of get shots onto this Void Archon. I don't think the Void Archon's the right target, but it's the target he's going for, so we might as well let him have it. He hasn't contested that flag at all. He hasn't scored his zone. He hasn't killed that Frustrum, which means that he's not scoring that flag either. And he's run out of pieces here. He just doesn't have the performance anymore to really take the battle to me, and he's not even contesting all the pieces, which means I just end turn and win the game from here. And I think it really came down to the fact that he just let me get so many models of those Void Archon sprays that just hurt so much, and he didn't think about spacing out to deal with them, especially with a list which doesn't have repo. You have to have your positioning be perfect, because if you don't, then exactly what happened here is going to happen. You're going to put your models up the field, your opponent's just going to take them off the field, and you're not going to have any models left. So my opponent passes turn at this point. He's still got the Void Archon to activate, but there's no real point. The Void Archon isn't going to do anything efficient. He just kind of accepts his fate and passes turn, lets me win on scenario. And even if he had taken up more board space, come closer to me, and spread out more, he probably would have done a lot better, because then it would have been a much harder deal for me to kill his models, because Aurora hits really hard. but she doesn't have a great way of dealing with light infantry. As you saw, my game plan was literally just roll as many dice as I possibly can to make sure that the most die possible. And it worked out for me, but that doesn't always work out. And if my opponent spreads out effectively, I don't eat 4 models with the AoE 4, then I think it gets a lot harder for me. I think that was my opponent's big mistake there, is that he just didn't respect that his positioning mattered more than my positioning mattered, and that it was better to come closer to me, give up more models, and then concede that you're going to lose a few rather than be so cagey and lose everything as a result. Alright, so that's going to wrap up this battle report. I'm really curious to hear what you guys think of the format I went with, if you think that it was easy to watch, and if you thought my commentary was on point, or if you thought that I was an idiot who didn't know what I was talking about. Please comment below, or comment on any of the posts that I make regarding this video. I'd really like to hear your feedback so that I can improve on this format that I'm trying out here.